Hi everyone, my name is Patrick, and I'm the director of the Rights Evaluation Studio, an independent consultancy looking at evaluation and litigation advocacy in other complex settings. I've been working with the Digital Freedom Fund for a number of years to help develop and iterate a framework and approach to impact assessment for the digital rights field. We've made this three-part webinar series to give you an overview of the methodology, which underpins the framework that we developed, the framework itself, and also how you can use and apply this framework in your own work. We hope you enjoy these webinars and I hope you find them useful. So a little bit about me before we begin. I set up the Rights Evaluation Studio about 2 years ago, and I specialize in measuring the impact and outcomes in complex environments, and in particular, projects, programs, and organizations that use litigation and advocacy as their tools for driving change. I have extensive experience in both qualitative and quantitative methodologies, and I've been working with the DFF for a number of years to help them develop their framework and also maintain different monitoring and evaluation systems. So welcome to our first webinar in the series for measuring impact in digital rights litigation and advocacy. In this first webinar, I will present the methodology which has inspired our framework and approach. We'll start by introducing the methodology and the process, which is called outcome harvesting. And we'll also outline why we've chosen this methodology to base our framework on. We'll also discuss the process of developing what we call outcome statements, which is a key part of this approach. And we'll outline this with some examples and discuss some of the pros and cons of this methodology as well. So firstly, I would like to outline some of the key challenges to measuring the impact of digital rights litigation and advocacy work. It's a very complex environment with lots of different actors and stakeholders involved, and the timing of those interventions and those projects and programs can take years and years and years. And that context is also complicated by funding cycles, lack of resources, and a lack of access to relevant experts to be able to support the assessment of impact. And all of these things together make it very difficult to assess contribution and understand the sort of causal relations between your litigation and advocacy work and any changes that you might observe. So to respond to some of these challenges, for the approach adopted by DFF, we took inspiration from a methodology called outcome harvesting. I say inspiration because we're not using the full in-depth methodology, which can be quite resource intensive, but we've taken on some of the main principles which underpin this process and have adapted them to be suitable for this way of working. Outcome harvesting was designed to be highly participatory and for use in complex and difficult to measure settings and where there's many different actors involved. So it's perfect for mitigating some of those challenges I've just outlined previously. The process is based on the generation of outcome statements, which are structured and developed in a very specific way. Developing outcome statements is meant to be a participatory process, which is akin to harvesting or farming, which is where the name comes from. The idea is to cast an open, wide-reaching net when thinking about outcomes and results in your work, and not necessarily take a predetermined approach to what you think you would have achieved or what you might have achieved, and engage different stakeholders in the process to help develop these outcome statements, which I'll explain a little bit more later. So the idea is to develop a process which involves creating a bank or a database of these outcome statements, which are specific, evidence-based, and articulate a plausible contribution narrative of your work to those outcomes that you've developed. Before I talk a little bit more about the outcome statement development process, I'd like to take a step back and take a look at the definition of an outcome. Outcome harvesting uses a specific definition of an outcome, which is a meaningful change in relationships, practices, policies, or actions by an individual, group, or organization. The idea is that these are changes which are tangible or observable so that you definitely know that they've really happened. So why focus on outcomes? The reason why we're focusing on outcomes in this framework and in this approach is because outcomes are really what we're hoping to influence, and that we have a bit more control or influence over. We can influence these, we can measure these, and our actions and activities have a much closer link to outcomes than they do to impacts. And the idea is that collectively these outcomes are contributing to those bigger impacts which we're hoping to see in the world. So the focus is really not on attribution, but focusing on the contribution of your activities, your actions, your litigation, your advocacy, and how that's influenced the actions, behaviors of those different actors that we discuss: individuals, groups, organizations, institutions. So it's shifting the question to not ask what did we achieve, but we're asking what did we contribute to that change that we've seen or observed, and how significant was that contribution? So when thinking about outcomes in litigation and advocacy for digital rights, really we want organizations to be thinking about outcomes throughout the whole process, rather than just focusing on the judgment or when judgments are implemented. This process is designed to capture outcomes throughout the entire litigation process. So, for example, when organizations are researching, scoping, and planning their litigation or advocacy, there might be changes in internal organizational things, or perhaps changes in the skills, expertise, and the application of these skills and expertise by those that are doing that research and planning. Perhaps in the process of preparing the legal submissions, there's changes in the digital rights field. Maybe there's new connections, new collaborations, different types of engagement between different actors that are important or significant to capture. So to sum up, we're looking at lots of different types of outcomes: internal, external, intended outcomes, unexpected or surprise outcomes, as well as looking at both the positive and negative changes that your work might have contributed to, and trying to capture those as well. So now we get to developing the outcome statements. The idea is to literally write a statement, which might be 1 to 3 sentences long, for example, and just trying to document what's changed, who changed it, when it happened, and trying to be as specific as possible with what that change is and what it's about. So rather than saying something like, oh, the media is now more interested in privacy law, it's really trying to pin down what you know and what you can evidence. So X, Y, and Z newspaper never used to report on privacy law breaches, and now they are starting to report on these and are referencing our litigation. So trying to articulate the relevance and significance of these statements, and also trying to support these statements with evidence and evidence of the contribution to that change. So the outcome is the precise description of what changed and when. And the other things that need to be factored in is the history, context, or the significance of why that outcome or that change you've identified is relevant or important. Providing the evidence of how you know that that outcome has changed, or that outcome has happened, rather. Articulating what you contributed to that change. So what did your litigation or advocacy contribute to that change? And also acknowledging the contribution of other actors or other factors which led to that change. And that way you help to get a more realistic or more nuanced understanding of the role that your litigation has played. So here are a few examples of outcome statements so you can get a better idea of what they look like. You might want to pause the video here and read them, but you'll see that they're very specific in terms of the change that they're describing. They've outlined how and why they think their work has contributed to that change. And they've also cited some evidence or some rationale to support that contribution narrative. And here's a bad example of an outcome statement. You'll see from reading this, it's not clear when or how the change happened. The scale of the change isn't very clear, and the relevance or why this change matters isn't really obvious. So sometimes it can be a bit tricky to start this process. So here are some prompts that you might start to ask yourself when starting to develop outcome statements with your colleagues or partners or whoever you might be involving in the process. So just to outline some disadvantages to this methodology, sometimes changes aren't always visible, and it only allows you to capture changes that you really know about. It also requires some resources and time to practice developing the statements and also some monitoring of the wider context of the situation. And in addition, some types of changes are easier to capture than others, so you can end up with a skew of the kinds of outcomes that you're capturing. In terms of advantages of this methodology, it takes a much more flexible and open approach to what success and achievements and outcomes look like, and allows these to be defined by the people who are most affected by these issues, by the stakeholders, the applicants themselves, as well as the organizations working on these issues. It also provides a useful way to make use of data and information that you already have access to, or more anecdotal information, and you can pair it with the evidence standards that we've provided in the framework to help add a layer of rigor and structure to the way that information is used. So that's the end of this first part of the webinar series. I hope you've enjoyed it and it's given you some food for thought around thinking about another way of capturing outcomes for your litigation or advocacy work. Thanks for watching this part of the series. I would suggest you now hop over to the second part of the series, which looks at the thematic impact framework for digital rights litigation and impact measurement, which we've been trialing and which has been used to frame some of the outcomes that are collected through this methodology that we've just gone through.